Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Quirino Cristiani. Now, this is an episode of Lost Film File, where I usually talk about a film that is lost and everything I know about it. And I thought I'd do a change of pace and sometimes do episodes about certain people whose entire filmographies, or most of their entire filmographies, have been lost. And Quirino Cristiani might be maybe one of the most important people in animation to have almost everything lost. He directed the first two animated feature films. This was years before Prince Ahmed, and he was also the first one to make an animated film with sound years later. He's also the first person to direct more than one animated feature film. He's done all these incredible firsts, but sadly we don't have any of it. Now, the controversy, I guess, around him, it's not really controversy in terms of really negative or something, is that oftentimes when people say, oh, well, Prince Ahmed is the first animated film, everyone goes, oh, no, El Apostol, or The Apostle by Quirino Cristiani, is the first animated film. And you are correct. But here is the thing about that, is that I think Quirino Cristiani is someone we should talk about. Obviously, I'm making a video about him. But when talking about the first animated film, Prince Ahmed usually gets mentioned because most people around the world didn't know that The Apostle or his second film, Without a Trace, existed when Prince Ahmed came out. They thought that Prince Ahmed was the first animated feature film. It was like an unprecedented thing. And it also premiered with Jean Renoir premiering it in Paris and showing the film world about it. Lottie Greiniger was much more connected than Quirino Cristiani. Most people, and even in terms of Hollywood and American Europe, weren't aware of these films until Walt Disney did a South American tour for research for Saludos Amigos much later, like after Snow White and so forth. Even then, people couldn't see it. So in terms of influence, I wouldn't say he has much of one, because just no one could see them. Often these films had one print only and then were destroyed in a fire. How this was the first thing, but it is not the most influential thing, and that's a difference in art history. Now, I still think he is ahead of his time, so much so it's ridiculous. He should deserve more credit for doing things with animation, and especially political films about animation before anyone was even doing animation, which is insane. And particularly about Argentina, and showing how Argentina was miles away from everybody, as they had a guy who was making several different animated feature films before most countries had one of them, is pretty mind-boggling in itself. I don't want to diminish what he did, but I know so many people, when you say Prince Ahmed, they go, oh, what about Quirino Cristiani, and what about these films? It's sort of a different thing. It's kind of like a different kind of footnote, but it is an incredibly interesting footnote, and that's why I'm making this video, to talk about that. But I think in terms of the shorthand of saying that what is the first animated film, it makes more sense to say Prince Ahmed, because so many of the animators who worked for Disney, worked for Warner Brothers, all that, when they saw what was the first animated film, they saw Prince Ahmed. It wasn't until years later they learned that there was another film which none of them could see. So that's the deal with that. Not to diminish it, but that's just the way it is, unfortunately. If someone ever finds The Apostle and can release it, I think that would be an amazing thing, and something that the world of animation and animation history desperately would love to have, but unfortunately we do not. Quirino Cristiani mainly used, and specifically the films we're talking about in this video, mainly used cutout animation, which is similar to what Lottie Greiniger did. But he was originally did political cartoons, which were very big in the Argentinian newspapers. He wasn't the most famous illustrator to make political cartoons in Argentina, but he certainly was one of them. What took him from just being another political cartoonist to being a ahead of his time animator was producer Federico Valli, who had worked with the Lumiere brothers and had some knowledge of film, and actually had some Emile Cole stuff, who he would then show to Quirino Cristiani, and had a newsreel series, and came up with the idea like, hey, why don't we have an animated part in his newsreel series, which was called Actualidades Valli. It's like 2 minutes of animation, but he had it in there. That is also lost. But that starts basically all of Quirino Cristiani's films have something to do with then president of Argentina, Hipólito Yrigoyen. I'll probably just call him Yrigoyen because I'm not going to say any of that right, unfortunately. But he seems to have almost an obsession with this president, going after him for various things. I don't know much about this president, and I don't know much about Argentinian politics and Argentinian history to really go into that political candidate and what he represented. It seems like he was voted on more by the working class and so forth. I'm not exactly sure whether these films took a conservative or liberal bent, although it seems like a lot of corruption and how he would get mad at people and so forth. It seems to be things of that that nature. I can't really get into it more than that because I really don't know. If you know about Argentinian politics and history, please talk about that in the comments. But it seems to have started his relationship with the producer Federico Valle with that newsreel, and that went over very well, and they thought, well, let's make a film, and that's where El Apostol came from. This was in 1917 that film came out, and there was one print of it, and it played in a theater because the theater owner said he'd put up the money with Federico Valle, who received, unfortunately, most of the credit. But this film played was like probably the biggest success of Quirino Cristiani's whole career. Everyone loved it. It got lots of notices in the newspaper, but in those notices they gave credit to Federico Valle and was given to a much more famous political satirist who made political cartoons and newspapers, who's mostly known as El Mono, or the Monkey, whose actual name will be down here, which is unfortunate. It ran for 6 months in one theater when you could do that, I guess, in 1917, and was another satire of Yrigoyen, and particularly how he was so mad at the city of Buenos Aires, he goes on top of a mountain and takes Jupiter's lightning bolts and throws them at his enemies in Buenos Aires, and they actually built a huge model of Buenos Aires and burnt it down. Because animation was a little looser then, you could get away with kind of doing things like building models and having animated characters in the models and so forth. Also, because it seems that Quirino Cristiani sort of made up a lot of what he could and couldn't do. He was mainly animated like he animated the newsreel thing on his balcony in his apartment. He had a much bigger crew on this film, obviously, and Valle really believed in him, but it seems like Valle wasn't necessarily political, didn't have much politically to say, and then kind of just was happy with the success of this film, but they didn't actually work together again, which is unfortunate. It seems like that relationship worked more on his early works and so forth, and the only thing that's left of this is some concept art and reviews and pictures of the city that the character who Yrigoyen represents, I guess, through lightning bolts at the city. And it was lost in a fire in Valle's vault in 1926, unfortunately. Fires is pretty much, in vaults, is pretty much what took out Quirino Cristiani's entire filmography, really, which is sad. And this was really the biggest success of his career, getting tons of notices. People really loved it. But then his next film, called Without a Trace, or Sin de Jour Rastros, was a little different. It played about one night, according to some people, or it played for just a little bit, but then was seized by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs by Argentina because of its stance on Argentina not entering World War I. This was 1918, of course. It is about a sinking of an Argentinian ship by a German commander, Baron von Luxemburg, who was basically meant for the sinking of the ship to get Argentina to go to World War I, but some survivors told them what happened, and so they did not go. The press did not cover it at all. From the little times it was shown, it wasn't very well received. It is critical, again, apparently of Yrigoyen, but probably the least amount of Yrigoyen, supposedly, of all of them, I think. But the fact that it was seized by the Foreign Affairs has led people to believe this one may have survived. Often people say it deteriorated because it's silver nitrate. No one is exactly sure. The sad thing is they didn't make copies of any of these films, and I wish, I talked earlier about how Walt Disney had come to Argentina and met Quirino Cristiani, offered him a job and wanted him to work for him and all this stuff, and loved the films of his that I guess he could have seen at that time. I'm assuming he didn't actually get to see El Apostol, or the Apostle, because that had been destroyed according to this at that point, so maybe he saw his film that I'm going to talk about after that. But this film was not in any fire that we're sure of. Everyone's fairly certain it was deteriorated, but we're not exactly sure what happened to it. And since it was played the least amount and covered by the press the least amount, there's almost less known about it. We know what incident it's based on, but we know that I'm sure Yrigoyen had no reason to, like this movie. He might not have known because Quirino Cristiani was so undercovered for his first, momentous big animated film, which was also considered a big technical marvel and hailed and so forth. But I think since no one really knew it was the same person, they would have needed El Mono and Federico Valle to have been credited, but neither of them worked on his second film. I think that's probably one of the things that probably hurt him the most, is the idea that he had gotten famous through this newsreel from Federico Valle and this movie produced by Federico Valle, and people didn't understand auteurism in 1917 or anything like that, as feature films were in itself very new at the time. But then between 1918 and 1931, Quirino Cristiani kind of went away. He was kind of living as a gypsy, playing films for poor people with Chaplin films and other short films with commercials that he would make. He was doing some political cartoons and so forth, but then he would go on to make Helidopolis, or Polido City, which would be the first animated feature film with sound with the Vitaphone sound on disc system. It was a story that was about the Argentinian president, again, Yuri Guñan, floating around his boat, which was Polito City, which represented Argentina, while being swarmed by hungry sharks, which were supposed to be the radicals. Now, this seemed to be because Yuri Guñan had left the presidency and then come back, and then during the production had been kicked out of Argentina from being the president during a coup, and then unfortunately died, I think, like after this film had been released but was still playing. And this film played for a little bit and he kept bringing it back and into circulation, but then he took it out of circulation because frankly people liked Yuri Guñan and didn't really want to see him be made fun of, and there were songs to it. It seemed like a bigger production. He animated it predominantly himself and had to change it mid-production as he wanted it, or I keep reading he wanted to have it come out, so he de-emphasized Yuri Guñan and had more of the generals who ousted him, kind of changed the emphasis of the film. Sounds like he had a lot of problems in production. It's probably good that he was working by himself because people probably would have gotten fed up. He added sound, which was unprecedented at the time. 31 sound was newer to film. It wasn't completely new, but in Argentina I guess it was newer, and he used the Vitaphone sound on disc system because sound, you had to get a disc to match up with the film because there wasn't sound on actual film at that time. He got it to work and he had various songs within it, but it didn't really go over as well. And it seems like, you know, it was a very ambitious way to come back to make, like, I think it was only like around, it's kind of loose on what number animated film this would have been, but it sounds like it was honestly the 5th animated film made. And it didn't play as well, and then he took it out of circulation because it wasn't as fun to make fun of him at the time and no one was as into it. And that film was later destroyed in one of the fires, in either a fire in 1957 or in fire in 1961. He did make other films. He made a film about like the monkey clock watchmaker, which is on YouTube, and there are various clips of his, but most of his filmography has unfortunately been destroyed. And Quirino Cristiani is probably someone who should be hailed more in animation, but unlike when we talk about Prince Ahmed, which seems to be something that you can't, him and Prince Ahmed seems to, I don't even know if he saw Prince Ahmed, but it seems to be something that they're constantly battling one another. It's like you can see Prince Ahmed referenced in Steven Universe. We unfortunately don't get to see much of his work referenced, but it's also interesting, like, had these films gotten more of a release, or, you know, I wish Disney had, you know, I'm not really it's not Disney's fault they were destroyed, but I wish he had said, let's make copies of all of these right now, please, dear God, so we can have some of this stuff for animation history's sake. And if he had done that, we would have an important piece of animation history. Think of what animation would have been differently if we looked at animation more as political satire. Animation has gone in a completely Disney-fied way, and it's interesting to think how, you know, Quirino Cristiani's films were all these like political films. It reminds you almost of what Winsor McCay did with the sinking of the Lusitania, particularly with Without a Trace, frankly, which is an obvious parallel. But it shows like other avenues animation could have gone into, but since we can't see these films, we don't know them. It's probably one of the saddest things and one of the more important pieces of film history that have been lost, not having the filmography and the feature film work of Quirino Cristiani. And even the films that are available, a lot of them that are available don't necessarily represent his kind of cutout style of his feature films. That is the reason that we're talking about him. So we've completely lost a huge animation auteur and kind of his auteur style completely. It is one of the saddest things of film history that he is not kind of being able to be shown to animation students and see where animation came from the way that Prince Ahmed does. It's not Prince Ahmed's fault that that happened, unless Lottie Ridiger, you know, lit those fires or something. But unless someone can prove that she did, which I don't think she did, it's an incredibly sad thing that he is not able to be hailed and treated the way he honestly should be. And, you know, maybe these films are awful and they don't really represent anything. Having someone who saw the Emile Cole stuff and seeing early animation be inspired so much to go off and do these things, it's such an amazing story. It's so interesting seeing an animator take a subject like a political candidate and be obsessed with them and make feature films and, you know, have a huge hit, and then have two films that frankly don't really work out as well, but was not able to be contained within their ambition. It seems like even in the story of his first, you know, big success, he wasn't really recognized the way he should. A really sad theme going throughout his whole career is he really never was given the respect he really should have been for being the first person to make an animated feature film. I think that makes Quirino Cristiani probably one of the most important figures in film history that we have frankly lost most of their great works, and I hope people never forget what he has done, because what he did throughout his life and throughout his career is something that no one did before. And frankly, to be the person who directed 3 animated films before anyone had directed more than one, and directed both the first feature-length animated film and the first feature-length animated film with sound, is a pretty amazing thing. I don't think that happened in live action. D.W. Griffith, who didn't even technically, I guess, make the first feature-length film, didn't also make the first feature-length movie with sound. It's like he was groundbreaking and then he broke ground again. He was kind of an iconoclast, a rule breaker, and someone who did things his own way and was able to do things his own way before anyone else could even make those things away. It's pretty awe-inspiring what he did with his life. There is a documentary about him. You can only buy it through a website, which seemed a little shady to me, so I didn't do that. If you want to go through that, maybe order it. Maybe I should have watched that, which I'm going to link all my research stuff in the links below. It seems like a lot of people have done a lot of great research, so we're able to understand and know more about Quirino Cristiani. And if you ever find any of his work, please release it as soon as you possibly can, because you are holding an important piece of film history that frankly should be seen and frankly should be given the respect that it really deserves. Unfortunately, we just get to hear about this guy who was ahead of his time and did all these things his own way and made animation represent something to him through his own auteurism, and kind of makes you ponder and think all the possibilities that animation has, and made him think about the possibilities animation has before animation had all those possibilities written by someone else. He wrote his own way, and it's frankly inspiring to think everything that this man did, and it's sad that I'm talking about this on Lost Film File. So if you would like to talk about Quirino Cristiani, then comment below in the comments, and subscribe if you would like to.